Richard Reed is coming up next. He is the anthropologist working with native Indians, Guarani Indians in the forests of eastern Paraguay for more than 3 decades. As in the last few years, the forests have been felled and the Indians are forced to take refuge in the cities. His recent work follows them into the squalor of the urban landscape there, and he began his career with Cultural Survival, that is an indigenous rights organization. Today he's in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Trinity University, where he heads the Environmental Studies program. Again, a guy way too smart for me, Richard Reed.
You know, that makes it sound like a really hard topic. And I started out trying to figure out how to present this as the final piece of the night. And let me just say that there's a classic anthropology text written about Amazonian Indians, which is called The Savage and the Innocent. And so I was thinking perhaps tonight I would start out with the title, The Ravaged and the Indigent, which doesn't work for 2 reasons. One reason, it just dies, right? But the other reason is it doesn't capture the primary concept that I want to work with tonight, and that's this idea of resilience and the resilience of these people over the long haul. The photos I'm going to show come, and much of this research comes from a trip I took in January with my son Austin, who's now 20, and so let's start. I want to start with this Lalipuku, who's a 10-year-old Indian girl that I met when I joined the Guarani Indians in the early 1980s. Her parents kind of took me in, Fernando and Rosa, when I was a stranger in a strange land. They gave me something to eat, and they kind of took me in when I had no idea how to live as an Indian. And at that time, most of this area was forested. In fact, the forests kind of extended from the Andes all the way across to the Atlantic. And at least in the Paraguayan portion of that, there were very few roads. To get up to the community I worked in, I had to walk about 40 kilometers up on small paths through the forest. And up there I found the Guarani, who were living in these isolated households, each family in their own little cleared area. This is Fernando's house in the 1980s. Rosa had her garden, and Fernando hunted and fished and collected a little tea to make money. I've been going back there over the years, and I've been taking pictures, and when I was there in January, Fernando hauled out this picture board that he'd assembled of photos I'd taken over the years. And in those photos, you can see Lali and her sister Angela as they grow up from being little girls to big girls. And changes have taken place in the countryside as well. That little trail that I took up in the 1980s became an ox cart track and then a jeep track. And today you can drive a bus or a truck or even a car right into the Guarani community. Now, as the roads went up, the forests went out. And each time I went back to visit, each year I'd go back, there was a little more sun on the track. And by the time the 1990s rolled around, the ford had largely been removed to make way for cattle and cotton, and finally for soybeans. And this area has become the world's 4th largest exporter of soybeans. Now, this is a problem. You've got these soybeans expanding, and you've got these indigenous communities. And so the reason we went into this area in January was to visit this community, Irapuato, that had recently been forced off its land by a Brazilian soybean producer. This is a Guarani Indian of that community, and the Brazilian had come in and just started clearing their forest, and when they resisted, he paid a judge to sign the title over to him. And then he hired peasants to come in and burn the houses and beat up the leaders and poison the wells and kill their domestic animals. Now, when we came across them in January, they were quite literally living in tarp houses beside the road, trying to figure out what the next step was. And this is kind of a generalized problem, and the violence of rural Paraguay is forcing indigenous peoples off their land. And in many cases, the only refuge they can find is in the capital city. They get on buses, they get in trucks, and they get down and try to find any kind of square foot they can in an empty lot or a vacant building in the capital city. And then the women start begging, and they go into the grocery stores and they buy food and feed their families. But the purpose of this is to try to figure out how they can get back into the countryside to restore their lifestyle. These families were hard, but what was harder for me were the adolescents, the kids, the 14, 15, 16, and 17-year-olds who became quite literally packs of lawless young people running through these kind of vacant lots. And inevitably they took to drugs and increasingly to prostitution, and really entered into kind of a lost existence. This is one of the places where these drug-addicted kids, and you can see on the right side of the photo here the plastic bags filled with shoemaker's glue that they've been huffing to stay high. Now, at this point, the story changes. Because at this point, we were visiting these kids, and I come across Angela, Fernando's second daughter. And she's been working in the capital city as a liaison to trying to get some of these Guarani kids to leave the drugs and leave prostitution and integrate themselves back into communities. And she told me that Lolly, the little 10-year-old girl, is also in the capital city, and takes me out to find Lolly. Lolly is living, well, in some pretty harsh conditions. She's living actually in the city dump, in a floodplain of the river where the municipal garbage is dumped. And she and her family have kind of carved a little spot there. And this is my son, Austin. We were sitting there the first time we arrived, and the dust and the flies and the stench and the heat, and I just turned to him and I said, Austin, I said, this is hell. I said, we're here. And this is as bad as it gets. And at that point, when I said that, at this time, I really felt it. But then I started talking to Lolly. And this is Lolly at 42 or something. And I discovered that Lolly actually feels like she's carved out a kind of a nice life for herself in the city dump. She has her children with her, and her husband's come, and her father-in-law's there. And they've actually built a little house for themselves. And they've begun to collect garbage and recycle plastic and metal and sell it and make about $2 a day, enough to buy their basic needs. And then they've gone farther. They've gotten together with some other Guarani families, and they've actually gotten recognized as a native community by the federal government. So they're getting health benefits, and they're getting a school, and they've even got a little religious place there. And I don't think I think it's by chance, but I don't think it's simply ironic that this is at the foot of the monument to the last great Guarani leader that met the Europeans when they arrived in the 16th century. But coming back to resilience and Lolly and her story, I just want to finish up with this picture of Lolly's daughter. This is Lolly's daughter now 30 years later. She's got that same smile, those beautiful brown eyes. I think she's got the same hope and the same expectation her mother did 30 years ago. And she's approaching the future with the same kind of resilience that I think her mother had when I first met her then. So, thank you.
Okay, now, before we go here, I have a couple of questions. How did you get to Paraguay from where you were before, and how often do you get back there?
I get back. I try to get back every other year. Now that I've started this stuff on homelessness, I'm hoping to get back every year. I'm just coming off a sabbatical, and so actually I had the entire time I could have been down there, and I took January and part of February and spent that time.
And what do you teach at Trinity?
I teach anthropology and environmental studies.
And so you take your kids to hell regularly? Is that
once you spend some time there, the trick is you discover actually that while it looks hard on the outside, it's playing the best possible use of a very bad hand of cards. Mm-hmm. And so you have to look at it and you have to say, it's not hell. It's actually, in many ways, they're doing pretty well.
Do we pity them too much as a culture? And when you go down there as an anthropologist, you go, oh, this is a terrible condition. You have them say, oh, I didn't think so.
The reason I presented this, and the reason I wanted to present it to this group is because I think that we can learn from the resilience that they've got. Because I do think I don't think they're suffering more than most of us. Mm-hmm. And I think that what's impressive is how well they're doing it.
And one other thing that people might wonder is, did you see any similarities when they're felling the forest and they're clearing the land to anything in the US where, we have a little sprawl issue?
Yeah, I think that, but I think
Leading question. That's what's called a leading
What I was
question.
struck about was that really what they went through in the 1980s and 1990s was what we went through in the 1880s and the 1890s here in the United States. It's a historical color.
Okay, do you have any books coming out? Anything you want to plug? Everybody else?
My books don't make any money.
Excuse us, feel sorry for him. Give it up for Richard Reed.